Well, hello and welcome to Insight with Political Tours, the travel company led by reporters around the world. For the moment, India and Pakistan's ceasefire seems to be holding after possibly the worst bout of violence between the two sides in over 20 years. Whereas in previous conflicts, the clashes have mainly been limited to the disputed borders in Kashmir, this time they've gone well beyond that, and the rapid expansion of fighting has raised real fears of a nuclear war. Joining us, we have our very own Owen Bennett-Jones, who knows more than many about the region, having been the BBC correspondent in Pakistan for many years. Hello and welcome, Owen.
Hello, how are you?
Good to have you just swap roles, as it were. This time I'm asking you the questions. I suppose the best thing to do is to have a quick recap of what's happened in the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, well, it started off with this attack on some tourists in Kashmir, and 26 were killed. And apparently the attackers were saying, "Are you Hindus?" before killing them. And that was a direct attack on Modi's policy, which has been to make Kashmir safe enough for tourists to go there. And they've been going in huge numbers. I mean, if you go to Kashmir now, it's actually overrun with people. It used to be a very quiet place. It's not anymore. Well, at least up until this attack. And so it was very offensive to Modi and obviously a huge terrorist attack. So then there was this Indian response, which was very surprising to me in that I assumed that they would attack targets across the line of control in Kashmir, keep this conflict within Kashmir, which is what's always happened in the past in situations like this. But they didn't. They expanded it and hit, in particular, two militant camps, one of which I've actually been to, just north of Lahore, which is Lashkar-e-Toiba, and there's another one down south, Jaish-e-Mohammed, which is much more difficult to get to. Now, of course, the Pakistanis denied that these were terrorist camps. And that upped the ante enormously. So the escalation, really, in that sense, came from the Indian side. And then Pakistan responded, hitting air bases in India. And then it all blew off. And they were attacking, military targets on a very intense basis.
And I suppose the other different ingredient is that you've got a White House that's not very assertive when it comes to dealing with other people's conflicts. I mean, they're careless.
Well, it seems that way. I mean, I think if they care, it's because Trump wants to dominate China, and he sees India as a very important ally in that. He doesn't want India distracted by a conflict in South Asia. So I think they may have had that interest in it. And having said, I mean, Vance literally said, "It's none of our business, we're not interested." And then Rubio did mediate, and apparently successfully. I mean, I think it was quite an easy mediation in that both sides realized they were very rapidly climbing the escalatory ladder with astonishing speed. I mean, just in hours almost, days anyway.
Yeah.
And they're looking at nuclear war. So they thought, we just don't want to go there, and they needed an off-ramp.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it's worth just going to some of the details about those clashes. You've got, I mean, advanced fighter jets clashing with each other, and some of the world's latest weaponry around. Direct hits on military targets in both in India and Pakistan. I mean, going for not quite the headquarters, but near enough.
Yes, of the Pakistan army. That's right. I mean, one of the Indian strikes was on an airfield, military airfield. It used to be. If anyone's been to Islamabad, it's the one everyone used to use, and they built a new one for Islamabad for civilian use. And then this became an entirely military, well, shared civil military, and it became entirely military in Rawalpindi. So that is very close to where the army chief lives and where the army GHQ is, and it's not far from the heart of the Pakistani nuclear project. So it was a very striking target, that, and I mean, that was definitely what I think Pakistan and I think India too read, that this was just spinning out of control.
Okay, I want to cycle back in a bit to how, I mean, these are both nuclear powers, and I want to talk about how that sort of changed the conflict between the two of them. But let's step back a bit. Again, this is one of those conflicts. This is our fault. Just give us a brief rundown about why Kashmir is divided.
Okay, so Donald Trump said it had been going on for 1,500 years, which is obviously not the case. It's been going on since 1947. And basically, there was a Hindu ruler. It was one of the princely states. About a third or a bit more than a third of India, when the British were there under the Raj, was not under direct British control. They were princely states run by local Maharajas, Nawabs, different names, local rulers. And the British would reach a deal with them and say, look, you're still sovereign in your area, but we'll look after foreign affairs, defense, communications, things like that. And we'll leave you there. So when the Brits left in 47, these guys said, look, we're good to go. We're back to independence. And the Brits had not really, and sort of bullied them into joining either India or Pakistan. And there were various rules about how that was done. So that was the basis of most princely states went along with it. Some didn't and got invaded. Hyderabad, this very rich state, got invaded by India. A princely state in Baluchistan got invaded by Pakistan. So they were all resolved one way or another, sometimes by brute force. But Kashmir was not. And there was a Hindu ruler, a Muslim majority population. He went with India, and the population and Pakistan have resented it ever since, and that's the basis of the conflict.
This isn't the first time there's been a major conflict between the two sides. Just give us a rundown of the previous ones. None really. I mean, they've been very violent, but not like this. But just give us a rough idea of those clashes.
Well, it started off in 47. Right at the beginning, when it was clear the Maharaja was going with India and the Pakistanis sent some tribesmen in. So this use of proxy forces right from the beginning. And that's what India was saying with this attack on the tourists. This has been going on since 1947. You can deny it as much as you like, but these will be Pakistani-controlled forces. That's what the Indian line is. Pakistan denies it. And then wars in 67, and then the most recent in 1999, which I covered in Kargil, when in fact an Indian plane was downed in the middle of that as well. When the Pakistanis crossed it's not a border, it's called the line of control that splits the Indian control bit and the Pakistani control bit. They sent militants over with some serving personnel in the army and took the heights on the Indian side, and were the army assured the civilian government, the Pakistan civilian government, that those were impregnable positions and that they would never be removed from them. But in fact, the Indian army did remove them. And again, as you say, the Americans stepped in, and Nawaz Sharif, the prime minister at the time, had to go to Washington and sort of have a face-saving meeting in order to get out of it. So, yeah, there's a long history to it, and it never gets resolved. I mean, because the dispute is too difficult. And so it just seems to go on and on and on.
Okay, well, we'll talk about those groups in just a second, but before we do that, 1999 nuclear tests. Is it 99? But they both have nuclear tests, and that theoretically you would think, right, there's some very clear lines defined. You don't want to have major skirmishes, which makes this all the more surprising. So, what was the expectation back then, and what have they both got in terms of nuclear weapons?
Well, so the Indian side have been going for what they call a triad of nuclear weapons deliverable from air, land, and sea. And they're on their way to doing that. At first, Pakistan said it would just have a very minimum deterrent. That's all it needed to deter Indian attack. But as ever with these things, of course, they double and double and double and double and double. They also want a triad now, we're told. And there are lots of discussions about how many weapons they've got. They've both got enough to blow each other up completely.
Yeah, I read 180 warheads for India and 170 for Pakistan, but I suppose it's not just the warheads you've got; it's the other kit that sort of backs it up.
Well, also there's this huge issue in Pakistan of are the places where they're stored known, and there's this suggestion that they drive them around on trucks so as to avoid, have that mobile capability so that they will never lose their deterrent. They won't be sort of neutralized in the places where they're stored. So, yeah, and I mean, they're also worried about American attack on that, by the way, not just Indian attack. If the Americans ever decided that the Pakistani nuclear deterrent was something it didn't want, that's always been a fear in Pakistan, that the Americans would have a go at it. So, yeah, it's there. Those numbers you give, they go up every year. And it gets, the forces get stronger and stronger. I think the thing to take away from it, I mean, and let's not forget, there was a previous round of this where the Indians, Modi ended up putting huge numbers of troops on the Indian border, trying to sort of have a standoff with Pakistan, but it never went any further. And this one didn't go any further. And I think you have to conclude that deterrence works. I mean, this is, it's a PhD in the making. This is because it just shows that these two nations probably would have escalated further, but because of the nuclear arsenals, they didn't.
Or possibly because of international intervention. I mean, it seemed to be that they were going at it pretty
Exactly. They
furiously.
wanted a way out because they could see this was heading
Right.
towards mutual
They
destruction.
both wanted a way out. Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's. I mean, the other thing I hadn't really got my head around is the use of these armed groups by Pakistan as a part of their military strategy. So you hinted at it, but let's just go back to the attacks on India back in Mumbai in 2008, and that was just a little bit about that group. And then that's for most outside observers, this is pretty shocking. Why are you ready to use these kinds of people?
Well, I mean, it's something. It's not. Yeah, Pakistan's by no means the only country to do this. The Americans do it. The Russians do it. The Iranians do it. Everyone does it. They use proxy forces to assert their national goals. And in the case of Pakistan, they've got these groups that can affect policy in India, also in Afghanistan, and in Kashmir. So they're groups that are, I don't know if you've come across this idea of not so much plausible deniability, which is what people used to speak about, but implausible deniability. In other words, everyone knows what you're doing, but you can still deny it. And so, yeah, there is a reason for having them. As we've seen in this attack in Kashmir, they're deniable attacks, and that gives you diplomatic leverage.
So what do they achieve, and what does that achieve?
Well, the idea, the Pakistani idea is that this dispute should not be allowed to rest. They feel they have an absolutely strong case that the people of Kashmir would rather not be with India, and they want a referendum. They're not actually, their position, just to be clear, the technical position of the Pakistanis is not that they should control Kashmir. It is that there should be a referendum, which the Indians originally, way back in the 50s, said they agreed and said that should be the case. It's never happened. The Indians have withdrawn that position. But, many people in Kashmir would agree with the Pakistanis that there should be a referendum.
So possibly the biggest fear is that the situation in Kashmir becomes normalized, and therefore it becomes Indian. It's accepted that really, okay, this has been established for a long period of time, and let's just get this. Let's forget any idea about the question of its status. And I suppose. Was it in 2019 when Modi actually had put direct rule over Kashmir and abolished its state as a state within India?
Yeah, so just to run through that, it's an important moment because it was a disputed territory. The UN still has people on the ground monitoring that line of control. And Pakistan wants to keep it as disputed territory, that everyone should accept as disputed territory. They have these cartographical battles about it where India will try and ban any map. When I had a book published about Pakistan, I was very shocked when I looked at the maps. It had all been changed. I said, well, how did that happen? And it's penguin. And I was like, what did you do? And yeah, we have to do that in India. You can't just publish a map of Kashmir showing it disputed. And so that's been going on with the Indians. Basically, it is widely believed, although not a stated position of India, that they would accept the line of control as a border and settle for Pakistan having 1/3, India having 2/3 of Kashmir. That is not acceptable to Pakistan. The Kashmir Valley, which is the heart of Kashmir, is overwhelmingly Muslim, and they believe it should be part of Pakistan. Or under Musharraf, there were proposals for some kind of joint governance, some kind of compromise solution, but not as sovereign Indian territory. So then when Modi changes the constitutional status, it had special status because of this dispute, and just said it's a regular part of India. That was a big moment, and it did sort of, it was a way of Modi expressing his view on what should happen.
So then, why now? I mean, that's it's India's imposition of direct rules 2019. We haven't had a major conflict, outbreak. There was an attack in 2019, but not since then have you seen anything this significant. So why is this taking place now?
I'm not sure that's right. I mean, if there's not been a big spectacular thing that's hit the international headlines, but there are lots of stories out there of those who follow Kashmiri opinion closely saying that, the truth is that, this is what they're saying, that the Indian government has failed to win over Kashmiri youth. And if you go to Indian control Kashmir. I mean, there is very strong opposition to India, even among students who will go to Delhi to get a university education. And they will sort of integrate to India to some degree. But they remain politically very upset with the situation. And don't forget, it's like Northern Ireland was, where you've got a huge number of troops trying to keep this thing quiet. I mean, I can't remember exactly what the troop ratio to people is, but wherever you go in Indian-controlled Kashmir, there are troops everywhere trying to keep a lid on it all.
Okay, I'd love to get questions from people. So do put your questions in the Q&A box, or just merely raise your hand, and then you can put your questions directly to Owen. Let's talk a bit more about the understanding. I think we'll come to Modi in a second and what his agenda is. I think probably people are much more aware of the situation, the political situation in India than they are in Pakistan. So can we talk briefly about the role of the military within Pakistan and why they are that they are essentially the most important force or political force in the country?
Yep, they are, and they're getting more so. And they have effective control of a lot of areas of policy. It used to be just India, Afghan, American policy, nuclear policy, a few sort of restricted areas that the army would control. That's expanded into many of the normal functions of government that they now get involved with. But certainly on Kashmir, Kashmir policy is run by the army. And there have been prime ministers who've wanted to make peace with India and to reach out to India. That was true of Nawaz Sharif. That was true of Asif Zardari. That was true of Imran Khan. So I'm basically saying that is true of virtually all the civilian leaders who see it. It's just worth saying this, that, there's huge amounts of poverty in Pakistan and in India. And the single quickest fix, one simple thing to do would be to have trade across the Indo-Pak border, and it would be transformative in economic terms. And everyone knows it. And a lot of these civilian leaders realize they want it. But it's very difficult to get it through, in fact, impossible. And there are people in the military, the senior officers, who just think that it's, it is too important for Pakistan's national identity. Now, there have been army chiefs, I can't really say which one, but I've spoken to army chiefs who have said they realize it's unwinnable and they want it to stop, but they couldn't get it through their leadership. The other generals just wouldn't accept it.
So with that in mind, tell us a bit more about the Chief of Staff, Asim Munir.
Well, Asim Munir, I think, is a real believer in Kashmir and the Kashmir struggle. And he's unusual army chief in that he's said to be very religious. Quite often that has not been the case. I mean, General Zia years back was, but after General Musharraf came in, who was quite a secular figure, he appointed to the senior levels a lot of other secular figures and got rid of a lot of the more religious officers. So that has unwound. It takes a while for these things to unwind because those appointments are all in place for some years to come. But it did unwind with Asim Munir. He has a real grudge against Imran Khan, the former prime minister, who is now in jail. He's been an ISI chief. He's said to be quite emotional. And he's a strong man, and he has stamped his authority over the army, certainly, and I think would have been running this whole Kashmir campaign.
At the same time, the army seems to have expanded its role within Pakistan society, and I'm saying this because it's becoming far more active within the economy. I mean, the economy's been it sort of goes through troughs and peaks, but it's been a pretty bad situation. I was looking up the debt payments, just solely serving the interest. 61% of Pakistani revenue goes on servicing debt. That's an incredible figure. It seems unsustainable as well.
Well, is it unsustainable? I remember having a conversation with one of the Sharif family, not Nawaz, the man who's been 3 times prime minister, but someone close to him. And at the time of the nuclear tests, Japan was offering, I can't remember exactly, something like 2 billion not to test. And I said to this, so why not take the money? You can always test later. So take the money. And he said, no, we don't need to do that. I said, why not? And he said, well, once we've tested, we'll get money forever. And he's right. It was a very insightful thing to say, because ever since then, the IMF, whenever it comes to a crunch point, always bails them out, because they do not want to see a Pakistan economic collapse with nuclear weapons. So, in fact, it has been a great guarantor not only of their security, as we've just seen in this latest clash, but also of their economic ability to keep getting loans.
But well, let's continue with that sort of international aspect to it. Who are the backers of both sides, and what have they got to gain? What have they been observing?
So that's one of the difficulties that this has been. Is are the Americans a good mediator on Kashmir? I mean, not that the Indians want any mediation at all, but what role can the United States play? Because in the Cold War, if you remember, the Indians were basically allied with Russia as non-aligned and all that, and leaning towards Moscow. And Nixon, I think it was, famously said there's a tilt towards Pakistan from the American side. So that was how it used to be. Since the Indian economic miracle has happened, or it used to be called a miracle, and it sort of is a miracle, the fantastic amounts of growth, the Americans have switched, and after 9/11, I mean, it's a complicated and long story, but there has been a switch where the Americans are much more aligned with India, partly because, as I said at the beginning, they see it as a useful ally in the contest with China. And China, by contrast, has always been very close to Pakistan. At a time when China was pretty isolated under Mao and so on, there was always a close relationship with China. They used to talk about it being, our relationship is as deep as the deepest ocean and high as the highest mountain and this sort of thing. And they have, the Chinese get a lot of access to Pakistan. One thing worth mentioning is there is Chinese disillusionment on two fronts at the moment with Pakistan. The first is that their workers keep getting killed in Baluchistan by rebels who do not want any foreigner there, American, Chinese, anyone. And so that is very upsetting to the Chinese authorities, who are constantly pressing Pakistan to provide better security. So there's that. There's another thing, which is that China, in its normal way, has lent large amounts of money to Pakistan and wants it repaid, and it's not getting it repaid, and it's not used to it. And the Pakistanis are not used to repaying anything. So they're like going and say, well, can't we talk about it? And the Chinese are like, no. So there's quite a standoff on that. You've gone mute.
Sorry. On the weapons front, you've got, obviously this is a conflict now with some very modern weaponry, and that's not been built in Pakistan or India.
Well, most of the weaponry on the Pakistan side, I mean, maybe you were telling me earlier there's a Chinese jet, which I was unaware of, involved in this clash, but basically the Pakistan army's been equipped by America, as part of the anti-Soviet struggle in Afghanistan, as part of the anti-Taliban struggle in Afghanistan. There's been huge flows, billions and billions of dollars worth of weapons going towards the Pakistan army. India always had its relationship with Russia in terms of weaponry, and now is just on the market buying weapons where it can.
Yeah, and from what I have been reading, this is only from what I've been reading in the FT and others, is that the Pakistanis have a Chinese air missile defense system, some of which was knocked out by India earlier on. But then there was a Chinese fighter that shot down a French fighter, Rafale. So it was I think it's called a C-10 Dragon, or it was maybe a C-19 Dragon that shot down a Rafale jet, and that has caused sort of reverberations elsewhere. So this is possibly an example of a conflict of very high level, and lots of people are going to be selling each other weapons off the back of it.
Just to make a point about that air defense, is quite interesting, is that if you remember when bin Laden was killed, the Americans put 2 helicopters into Pakistan to do that act, and they were undetected. And it was part of the humiliation for Pakistan was that these helicopters got in, they flew very, very low apparently, and were very sophisticated, and they evaded all Pakistan's defenses. And one of the questions afterwards was, how could that happen? And so I think that makes sense to me, that after that, there would have been a lot of emphasis on air defense.
Yeah. We've got a question here. We've got Marty. Marty, go ahead. Marty has just got off the plane, I know, because I was with her in Moldova. Marty.
You've explained historically the Hindu ruler and the Muslim population. But what is the motivation for both countries to continue to have this conflict over Kashmir? Is there Are there resources in that area that both countries want, or is there some other factor that keeps this in flux, so to speak?
Well, I think from the Indian side, they would probably be happy to settle with the territorial divide as it is. So really, the interest in keeping it going as a conflict is on the Pakistan side, who believe there's been a massive injustice, and that the whole point of Pakistan being created was to be a safe place for Muslims on the subcontinent to live in, that they would not have been safe under Hindu rule, that they have been massively discriminated against. I mean, to give you some of the examples from way back before partition, you know, if an Indian Hindu in some areas was walking and a Muslim walked on his shadow, he'd get beaten up. You know, that Hindus wouldn't drink water from vessels that have been used by Muslims, this sort of thing. So all those reasons that were behind partition and creating a safe area for Muslims are offended by what's happened in Kashmir, where the Pakistanis say it was contiguous with Pakistan, so that was one of the rules that Lord Mountbatten set up during partition, and that it should have gone to them. And they have made it, you know, a key national issue. So if you read the papers in Pakistan, every day there is a full page of Kashmir coverage. You know, every single newspaper will cover it exhaustively. What's happened, you know, these committees and everyone who's got a little say in it, they're all being published all the time. So it is a key issue for Pakistan. And that is basically why the conflict keeps going. I mean, I'm sure if you spoke to a Pakistani officer, they would say they've been successful in keeping it going. They don't feel they've been successful in getting a just solution to Kashmir, but they do feel that they've done that. And if you go to the British House of Commons, I mean, there are often meetings about Kashmir because there are many Kashmiris who live in the UK, Muslims, and they press their members of parliament to campaign on Kashmir and so on. It's quite a live issue here in the UK too.
So it's not the economy, stupid, it's Kashmir.
It's an ideological battle which goes back to partition.
Yeah, okay. I see Alex has got his hand raised. Alex, go ahead. Question.
Hi, yeah, thanks, Owen. It's very interesting. I wanted to ask, you mentioned how Pakistan has historically, and I guess currently, used proxies to fight against India and also in Afghanistan. In this case, with the terrorist attack that happened, a few weeks ago that precipitated this conflict, it would seem that the attack itself was against Pakistan's interests. If you say that Pakistan's interests are de-escalation and that they didn't want this escalation with India at this moment. So would it be accurate to say that Pakistan has struggled to control these groups? And, to what degree, I guess, in other places in the world, we see, like with Iran, that there is a mixed degree of command of these groups, and, whether or not they set their own priorities or not. And what do you see in Pakistan? Is this group operating independently within Pakistan's borders, or is there a degree of control over them that they have?
So they have some control, and yes, there are proxy forces that do their own thing, and it's frustrating to the Pakistan military when it happens. I mean, you could look at the whole Pakistan Taliban movement as being like that. So in the northwest of Pakistan now, you've got the Pakistan Taliban resurgent, having left their sanctuaries in Afghanistan, moved back into Pakistan with the encouragement of the army. And they are now there and fighting soldiers. So, there's this very confused policy, which many people think is utterly counterproductive, of sometimes supporting, sometimes opposing, and the groups sometimes obeying, sometimes not obeying. But I guess the point about the Kashmir conflict is that, Pakistan state does have an interest in keeping this going, but not to the point where they start using nuclear weapons. So can this thing get boiling at a certain temperature, but not too hot?
The one thing that has I've been fascinated by, but also if I was to look at neighbouring Iran as an example, it's something that worries me, and that's the movement of the military more deeply into the economy. The military has always had some kind of role in the economy, but under this current chief of staff, it seems to be taking a much bigger role. And that if you see trade as a possible solution with India, those kind of people are not surely going to want to sort of have that kind of competition. The more deeply you get sort of embedded in the economy, the more you want to protect your own interests. Just can you describe what they've been doing, and do you disagree with that?
I mean, I don't think that's particularly new under this chief. I mean, in Egypt, I did a long piece once on comparing the military involvement in the economy in Egypt and Pakistan is very similar. And they have huge sectors, but they're in everything: banking, cereal, breakfast cereals, shoes, whatever you can think of. There will be a military factory that is doing that. And sorry, I just got interrupted there. So they're very involved in loads of sectors, and they have advantages. Like, no one can strike in a military factory, and they get easy access to credit, and they do have advantages which they can exploit. And so some civilians are quite upset, because if you're a road builder, you'll find there's a military operation doing it, which will be able to outcompete, be more competitive than you are. So that's been going on for decades. And yes, I mean, there was a big struggle with Nawaz Sharif over the Chinese investments in Pakistan and their so-called economic corridor that they wanted down to Gwadar in the south of Baluchistan. And Nawaz Sharif, as prime minister, said, "Look, if I can't even control that, I can't control anything. Let me to do that." And the military gave way on that and then regretted it, saying that it had been politicized and all the money went to various constituencies that were party political and so on. And so they ended up taking control of that too. So yes, I mean, they do have control of large parts of the economy, and I guess you're right that the trend is more and more, but it's not particularly been a lurch, I don't think, under this army chief.
Yeah, okay. We focused a lot more on Pakistan because I think it's the area that we know less about. We know a bit more, I think, about the BJP and Hindu nationalism. We do need to talk about it briefly, though. This has been very good for Modi, hasn't it? This boosts his nationalist credentials. He's being tough. What can go wrong?
Well, I'm not sure about that. I mean, I think he wants a stable Kashmir, and he sees it as part of India. He wants tourism to develop there, it to become more integrated into India as a whole. And I think this. People ask, what's the point of what the Pakistanis do? Well, I think these militant groups are preventing that happening, really, because there is insecurity there, and it does put people off going there. So, as long as this struggle is unresolved, there is a problem. I mean, what Modi has done is de-emphasize the importance of Pakistan. Previous leaders have spent an awful lot of time worrying about Pakistan. He decided, I think, after some of these big militant attacks, some of which were in Delhi, if you remember, that he would just try and ignore it and not go there, and concentrate on India's economic development and all the other things he wants to do in India. And so I think that is frustrating to Pakistan because they want to keep the competition for Kashmir going.
Well, in terms of, this is one of those disputes that's just been rumbling on for a very long period of time. Is there any additional leverage? Is there any suggestion at some point they're going to sort of sit down and try and work this out, or this just keeps on going?
Well, what's interesting is that Musharraf did try to do that, and he got no credit for it. And he actually did demobilize some militants. I met some guys. I didn't really believe this was happening, and I was assured it was happening. And I went to a pool hall in Rawalpindi, and I was told there's some guys there who used to fight in Kashmir, and they did. And I said, "So why are you here?" And they said, "Well, we've been given money to stop. And we've set up this pool hall." So Musharraf did that. And I think people in Western governments knew it, but they never really gave him the credit that he deserved, because it was an extremely difficult policy to push through the army. And it was stopped when, if you remember, there was a big summit which he did with Vajpayee in Agra. And the Home Minister from the BJP blocked a potential agreement on Kashmir. So the block actually came from the Indian side because they just thought that the Pakistani sort of backing down was not sufficient. And again, it was an ideological stance, really. And then there have been subsequent army chiefs who wanted to de-emphasize Kashmir, but it is too deeply rooted in the Pakistani military system for them to do it. It's difficult.
Okay. What I want to do is, just before what we'll do is we're going to wrap up in about 5 minutes' time. But I know Alex has got another question in just a second. But before we go, I do want to run through some of these groups that Pakistan uses. So there are 3 or 4. Do you want to run through them, Owen?
Oh, well, well, I mean, if you take militant groups in Pakistan, there are hundreds, and
Right.
yeah, there are some.
Kashmir focus groups, I meant, sorry.
Well, okay, Kashmir focus groups, yes. I mean, some are focused on Afghanistan, some are focused on sectarian violence, some are focused on, anti-tribal stuff, some are just drug runners. So there are all sorts of groups out there. There are two or three big ones that do concentrate on Kashmir, and their idea is to recruit in Pakistan and to help the struggle. I mean, the Pakistani state always says it just offers moral support to the Kashmiri struggle, but the question is whether, when they have these exchanges of artillery fire over the line of control, whether that's enabling some of these militants to cross over and then to set themselves up on the Indian side and launch attacks. So
training camps that you clearly know about.
There are training camps all through Kashmir, and there are other places which, one of the places they hit. I mean, I'm sure the group would say the bits they showed me were like a university, and it's a big place. I mean, huge place, and health facilities and education staff and all that sort of thing. But obviously, the group is one of the major militant groups that was also responsible for the Mumbai attack.
Yeah. Okay, Alex, one last question from you, and then we'll wrap up shortly after that. Go on, Alex.
Yeah, thanks again. So we talked a lot about India and Pakistan and their control of Kashmir, but I'm curious too, to what extent China, which occupies part of Kashmir as well, when it looks at this conflict, how does it interpret what's going on between India and Pakistan within the context of its control of part of Kashmir? I mean, we've already mentioned also that China supplies weapons to Pakistan that Pakistan is using against India. Can you explain a little bit about the dynamic there?
So it's very complicated. I mean, way back under, I think it was Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, ceded part of Kashmir, I mean, a small and remote part, that was being held by India, and said it was Chinese controlled. It should be Chinese controlled. So that really muddied the waters. And so it was only about 7 or 8 years ago that Indian and Chinese soldiers, there's some amazing films on YouTube, had hand-to-hand combat. They literally were killing each other with rocks. And it was really grim viewing to see those films. And the Indians were shocked that the Chinese had become so aggressive. But I think since then, although there are territorial disputes on all sides, China is seeing a much bigger picture now and doesn't particularly want to get bogged down over a remote bit of Kashmir. And so in this dispute was very much calling both sides to calm down. I mean, it can't be a mediator with India because it's so allied to Pakistan. But nonetheless, the message from Beijing was just stop this. This is not going to help anyone, much as it was from the United States and everywhere else.
You're clearly better at this than I am. Thank you very much. You've raced through and a huge amount of information, and it's been really, really useful. So thank you very much indeed. It's been brilliant.